Hello, Yu-Gi-Oh players, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJ and today I get to workshop my very first subscriber deck. This was sent to me by Jobob1232, whose channel you can check out right here. He's got duels, including duels with this very deck that I'm going to be showing you today. So let's get down to it. So there are a couple things that I noticed first about this deck. The first is that it has 41 cards. That's a personal pet peeve of mine. Maybe it's a little bit of OCD in my brain, or maybe it's the fact that I really don't like it when a deck with as little deck thinning power has 41 cards in it, or even more than that. It's nothing against Jobob1232, but there are a couple reasons that that's a problem. First is that it naturally means that you're less likely to get the cards that you really need when you need them. And that is a pretty big issue a lot of the time. The second reason is that it probably means that you are running cards that you don't need to have in there, which means you're just putting in more work to make the deck and putting in more work to get wins out of the deck. So I'm going to try and cut it down to 40 cards. It'll take a little bit of extra thought on my part in order to do that. But that's one of the things I'm going to do. The other thing that I noticed first is that instead of being a pure chain garden build, this is more of a garden beat variant, which is the thing you're seeing the most of this format, and in my opinion is probably the best build for this format, because while chain garden has a lot of power that this deck, that a garden beat deck probably doesn't have as much access to, it also can't really run a lot of cards that are good for taking out the current format. Things like Kaiku and Bear are less good for a chain garden build and work much better in a garden beat build. So I like the fact that this is a garden beat build because that is much more tailored for the current format. So why don't I just do a run through of the deck list, and then I can get down to talking about the cuts. First, we've got 2 Bear, then we've got the 2 Thunderbird, double Kaiku, a Grand Mole, double Ryo, triple Rabbit, 3 Tenki, 3 Black Garden, double Duality, Dark Hole, double Lance, Monster Reborn, and Terraforming. Then we have double Bottomless, double Breakthrough, double Compulsive Act, double Compulse Escape, Deprison, Magic Drain, Mirror Forces, Scrap Iron Scarecrow, the Solemn Twins, and Starlight Road. I'll get to the side deck later. So, getting to the cuts. First, I wouldn't change the monster lineup at all. It's a great monster lineup. I think it's extremely solid, and it works very well against this format. Especially, I like the 2 Bears. Normally, I'm not a big fan of Bear because it doesn't have much synergy with Garden or with your compulsories, but in this case, the sheer beatdown power of Bear is something you can't ignore and something you can't leave out of a garden beatdown build. So that's one of the things that I really liked looking at this deck. Then you've got your spell lineup, which once again is extremely solid and I wouldn't change at all. The thing that I notice is the double Lance. I really like Lance for this format. Especially, like, I've been running it at 3. Like, if you guys have seen my Nats profile for my Thunder Family deck, I ran 3 Forbidden Lance. It's just such a good card, especially in a beatdown style deck like this one. It protects your Kaiku when you summon it that first turn. Your Bear, it can add on to your beatdown power by, attacking a monster with Bear. And if your Bear normally couldn't run over it, even under Tenki, you could hit that Lance button, run over the monster, get the plus off of Bear. There's just a lot of good things that you can do with Lance that I think a lot of people are ignoring. I think the 2 Forbidden Lance is a really good choice for this deck. I wouldn't run 3 just because it's a space issue. Another thing I noticed is Monster Reborn. I normally don't run Monster Reborn in this deck, but that's mostly because I'm a macro whore. But in my opinion, it isn't absolutely necessary for this deck. There are probably some really good plays that you can pull off using Monster Reborn, but I normally wouldn't run it. If, as an alternative, if you would like, you've already got that 3 Black Garden in this deck along with the Terraforming, which gives you about a 50-50 chance of opening with a Black Garden, since that gives you a 1 in 10 chance of each card being being a Black Garden, and if you multiply that by 5, you've got a 5 in 10 chance of opening with a Black Garden. If you want to increase that chance even more, increase the speed, you can replace that Monster Reborn with a Terraforming, but it isn't absolutely necessary for the deck to function. So the spell lineup is also extremely solid. The things that I run into issues with are in the trap lineup, and I don't have a whole lot of issues. There are just some things that I would change around. The first thing that I notice is Mirror Force. I'm not a big fan of Mirror Force, especially this format, because every deck this format in the top tier has outs for Mirror Force. Dragasack has its tokens, which it can't be destroyed while it's got those tokens on the board. Evil Swarms have Pandemic, which, yes, Mirror Force burns so that you can use more spot removal later, but I feel like it's much better to be able to respond to their plays than to have to, or to stop their plays rather than to have to respond to them with Mirror Force. Just pretty much every deck has an out for Mirror Force this format, and it's, in my opinion, too slow to be a really operable card, especially with so many decks not having to go into the battle phase to take out cards on your side of the field. So Mirror Force really has to wait on your opponent and won't always work. So I personally, first cut I would make is the 2 Mirror Forces. The next thing I notice as far as cuts is D-Prison. That's the one I was thinking of. It's got the same issues with Mirror Force, not as many issues, but as one for ones go, D-Prison isn't going to be as useful as you would probably like it to be, because it isn't a spot removal card. Once again, it waits for your opponent to go into the battle phase, and the only card out of all the ones I listed before that isn't weak or that isn't strong against D-Prison is Dragasack. And in all reality, they can just make another one of those pretty easily, and having to wait to go into the battle phase means that they're probably going to take out something extremely useful like Black Garden. Personally, I feel like as one for ones go, D-Prison is a little too slow. It is better against this format than Mirror Force, but it's just another thing that that I do not like that much. So that's another thing that I would cut. The next couple of cuts are more replacements with better cards. The first one is Breakthrough Skill. Now, Breakthrough Skill is a freaking amazing card. And why am I timing out due to inactivity? Well, I'll talk about Breakthrough Skill while I am refreshing the page. So while Breakthrough Skill is an incredibly good card in general, since it's got that double use, you can use it during your opponent's turn or during your turn, it has one other card this format that I like better than it, and that card is Forbidden Chalice. Now, Forbidden Chalice has a couple advantages over Breakthrough Skill. While it can't use that second ability, it can be used the turn you draw it can be used from your hand, and it can be used during the damage step. Two things that you're really going to want to have available to you during duels with this deck. It has extra beatdown power, which is, of course, important for a beat deck, and it has the ability to negate effects during the damage step that you wouldn't be able to do with Breakthrough Skill, since Breakthrough Skill isn't a quick effect and doesn't deal with damage. Now, I realize that second ability of Breakthrough Skill to be able to use during your turn is really powerful, but for this deck, there aren't many things that you have to worry about negating during your turn. You aren't worried about Ophion, you aren't worried about Kaiku, you aren't worried about Jougin. It just seems to me that Forbidden Chalice is a much stronger card for this deck than Breakthrough Skill. So I will replace Breakthrough Skill with double Forbidden Chalice. Without the 0. Okay, I cannot type today. There we go. So the double Forbidden Chalice is the first replacement I would make. Now the next one I'm looking at is Magic Drain. Now Magic Drain strikes me as, while it's a really good card, it takes out things like Pandemic. It takes down, what's it called? Reju. It's a really good card. It's a 1-for-1 negation. However, there is one massive problem for it. If you're playing against Prophecy, one of the big two this format, instead of negating their judgment, they can just, I don't know, discard power from their hand, something that they'll probably search out later via, Blue Boy Secrets Mastered. So I feel like Magic Drain against spell books, you're going to run yourself into a lot of issues where you're not going to be end up negating the thing that you really want to negate. The other thing that Magic Drain would be weak to is in an Evil Swarm deck when instead of letting you negate that pandemic, they could probably discard a dress or something like that. That won't be as helpful for their deck as Magic Drains. And so probably going to be building up those dresses based on the amount of spot removal you do that doesn't have to do with just destroying monsters on your side of the field. Magic Drain doesn't seem like it would be as good as a card that I normally have never been into running in Chain Beat. And that's Dark Bride. Now normally I have massive issues with Dark Bride. The fact that it's a neg-1 is terrible for this deck in a lot of cases. Since this deck is based around slowly whittling down advantage until you can clear the board and push for game. And if you are taking advantage away from yourself, it's a big problem. However, one of the things I like about Dark Bride that makes it a bit of a mitigating factor is the fact that it can take out cards that would give your opponent way more pluses than just drawing one card off of Dark Bride. Things like Judgment, things like Yugioh. Those are two cards that go plus a bajillion if you let them go. But Dark Bride would just give them a +1 instead. So it's the difference between the +1 and the plus a ton that makes Dark Bride usable in this format. The especially good thing about it is there aren't very many counter traps in this format. You've got your Solemn, which you can also use, and then that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all people are running, which means that if they can't, they probably won't be able to take out that Dark Bride, which means that they're likely to use up a ton of advantage in order to go after that Yugioh play, or they're going to be stuck for playing a loop because they've tried to go for the Judgment play and you've negated that as well. So Dark Bride is going to be extremely good for you this format, even though it's horrible for this deck normally. I would definitely use it over Magic Drain. One of the other things that I've noticed about this build right here is the lack of Torrential Tribute. Now I understand the need to keep field presence, especially in this deck, which doesn't rely on your floaters as much. Field presence is really important for this deck. However, for any chain build, even if it's a Garden Beatdown build, especially with a deck that relies so little on having a lot of monsters on the board and just goes one at a time, having the Torrentials to respond to opponents' plays is infinitely valuable. One of the things that was pointed out to me when I went into Nats, and it was the reason why I didn't run Bottomless, aside from the fact that I was running Imperial Iron Wall, was the fact that if you wait to make the Bottomless play, that gives your opponent way more chances for an out. So say you are playing against Evil Swarms, and they go Caster into Heliotrope. At that point, you're going to have to wait for them to go into the Ophion in order to be able to use that Bottomless properly. Which means that they're still going to probably be sitting on a Dress or a Pandemic or something of the sort. If you hit them with the Torrential once they hit the Heliotrope button, after they use Caster, then they're going to be forced into using the Pandemic if they want to put Ophion on the board, which allows you to use your compulsories. Against Dragons is another example. Bottomless is very good when they summon their Dragasac. However, they, especially now, Dragon decks tend to be using Lance a lot. Anyway, Lance is a very common card for Dragon decks, and if they can just Lance their Dragasac, then they're sitting pretty. If you force them to use the resources and to go into another big dragon, that means that you've used that Torrential wisely, you've made them use up resources, and you've still got spot removal like compulsory left over to take out their Dragasac while they've used up their Lance in order to try and keep one monster on the board instead of having to use up the resources to go for 2 extra ones. So I think while Torrential does pose the threat of losing you field presence, the stuff that you get in return, the advantage that you get in return for using Torrential, especially with your classic or your dodgy floaters in here, is way more valuable than you can imagine. So I'm going to replace your Mirror Forces with the Torrentials. Now the final thing that I personally really have an issue with for this deck is, and it's once again, this is not a criticism of Jobob1232, this may just be his playing style, is I don't think there is any excuse right now to not be running the third Compulse Evac device. Compulsory Evacuation device takes out everything this format to some degree. You can side it out against spellbooks if you need to, but it takes out things from Tidal Mermail, Evil Swarms, Dragons. It can even hit spellbooks pretty hard, especially if they need to go for that Fate play or something. If they don't have a Prophecy monster on the board, they can't play Master, they can't play Fate. There are just so many things that you can do with Compulsory that make it amazing, and especially with this deck and its chainable powers, I don't see any excuse for not running Compulsory. Now, the one thing I'm seeing right here is the Scrap Iron Scarecrow, which is a really good tech this format because it allows you to protect your monsters from the big beaters that your opponent can get out. However, if you are concerned about that, it means that they're probably already getting some advantage on you that they would have gotten pretty much. Okay, so let me explain this a little better. If they're attacking you with a monster that you have to Scrap Iron Scarecrow in order to protect your monsters, then that means that you've probably failed to keep their field presence off the board, which means that you might as well have used a Compulsory in the first place. Now, I realize that Scrap Iron Scarecrow has that reusability, but in all reality, having Compulsory could be way more valuable than attempting to drag your opponent into the grind game, which if you're playing against dragons, you're going to lose. It's very difficult to win a grind game against Dragon Rulers. So I feel like, in my personal opinion, if I were to be running this deck, I would take out the Scrap Iron Scarecrow for a Compulsory Evacuation device. I understand the only running of 2 Compulse Escape devices, since you have the majority of your monsters don't have as much synergy with Compulse Escape as Compulse Evac, but the triple Compulse Evac, this format, is absolutely necessary. So those are the changes I'd make to the main deck. Now we have the side deck, and I'm going to try and make this extremely quick since this is already a 17-minute video. The side deck has the triple D-Fissure, which makes a lot of sense since macro-style cards are really good this format against dragons and against Tidal Mermails. That makes a lot of sense. Triple MST for your taking out of Skill Drain, Decree, things like that. MST can be really useful and also very useful against Fire Fist. The one thing that I get a little bit, I feel like is a little bit excessive, is the double Twister. I can see running 1 if you are really afraid of something like Skill Drain or Decree. That makes sense. But running 2, that's 5 spot removals for back row. I don't think you're going to be playing against a single deck where you can justify taking out 5 cards from your deck in order to put in back row hit. So I think that I would take out 1 Twister personally. Snowman Eater and Penguin Soldier is the next thing I'm looking at. For Snowman Eater, I see the logic behind using it, but I don't see a whole lot of motivation. Snowman Eater can take out Evil Swarm plays if they open with, a caster and a Heliotrope. If they attack with a caster, you can take out the Heliotrope, etc., etc. But I feel like there are a couple things that could work a little better for you than Snowman Eater in the long run, and I'll get to that in a second. The other thing is Penguin Soldier is not forbidden dressable, which is really nice, which is something you can get that is a problem for Snowman Eater. Penguin Soldier bounces cards instead of destroying them. But my only issue with Penguin Soldier is if you're playing against something like E-Dragons, it's a side deck card, so you're not going to bring it in against E-Dragons. So even if you're playing against Evil Swarms, if you bounce their 2 monsters, they're just going to use them next turn. So you could have that chance of sending Ophion back to the extra deck, and them not being able to dress it. But if they do decide to attack your Penguin Soldier before going into Ophion, they're going to just be waiting for another turn to make the same play again, and they're still going to get that plus off of running over your Penguin Soldier. If I were to do this side deck, there's a card that I think is even better than both of those cards and is useful for both of those situations, and it's Karakuri Ninja Sazank. Sazank has the same ability to destroy or take things off the board, to do spot removal as Snowman Eater, and the same ability to take out an Ophion as Penguin Soldier. The advantage is that, unlike Penguin Soldier, if they attack with their monsters before they go into Ophion, you can take out their monster with Sazank and make sure that they can't go into that Ophion to leave you for some beatdown plays the next turn. And one thing that people are going to point out is it still destroys monsters, so you can still they can still dress their Ophion to keep you from using its effect. The issue with that logic is the fact that if you read carefully, Sazank doesn't destroy. It sends to the graveyard, which means that they can't actually dress their Ophion to take out Sazank. So there are huge pieces of advantage to Sazank when you're playing against Evil Swarms. So I would personally take out the 2 Snowman Eater and the Penguin Soldier and replace it with triple Sazank. The side blocker can make a lot of sense, and the double Dyna makes sense, and same with the Banisher or the Radiance. If I were to add in another card, the card I would throw into the side deck is probably either Needle Sealing or Vanity's Emptiness, 2 cards that are very good for this deck. Needle Sealing has the advantage of being a chainable version of Torrential, that all you really need in order to be able to have it live is a Black Garden and for your opponent to play 2 monsters, which this format is not at all outside the realm of possibility, especially if you're playing against dragons or evil swarms. So this gives you another out for massive numbers of monsters. And as for the extra deck, the couple of things that I would change is just toss in a Fortune Tune, because actually that's pretty much the only change I would make, is take something out for a Fortune Tune. Fortune Tune is an incredibly important card for this deck, because if you really need to stall, it's better than Wind Up Zen Maze, because you can overlay your rabbits, and then Fortune Tune will put your rabbits back into the deck, and you'll be able to recycle them with Tanky and have more access to more monsters. And with this deck, having so few monsters, being able to recycle those monsters is a very, very useful thing. So this is the deck workshop for Jobob1232's Garden Beat build. I hope you guys like it. If you guys want me to workshop one of your decks, send it in to me via PM, send me a deck list, send me a picture from Dueling Network. Pretty much any way you want to do it, just send me your deck list over a PM and tell me that you want me to workshop it. Tell me your channel name. I can probably get that out of the subject of the email. And then I will take a little time to look at your deck and workshop it. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why. And then subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. This is the RJB0, and I got a jet, guys. See ya.